Get your tickets now if you're planning to fly anytime soon. The cost of jet fuel is hitting airlines hard.
This situation has both shortage and increase in price.
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. War in the Persian Gulf is tough on airlines. Also, a win by the far right in France seems more possible than ever.
There's very much a public message of moderation, normalization of the party, which has been a real success in electoral terms.
Plus, help wanted, someone good with their hands and willing to work with animals.
How did it feel today to try to use the mechanical milking machines?
It's something new to me, and so it's an experience. It was quite interesting.
Also, Mexico embraces Chinese EVs, and at the northern border, Americans sing for Canada.
That's all ahead today on The World.
This is The World. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Thank you for being with us today. Get your tickets now. That is the recommendation from travel experts who warn that with the increasing price of jet fuel, airline fares will soon skyrocket, and that some airlines might not survive the crisis.
The U.S. and Israeli war on Iran is what prompted this massive crunch on the global supply chain. It is one effect of that war, but few things have been hit harder than jet fuel. Our transportation correspondent Jeremy Siegel starts us off today looking at why the airline industry is so vulnerable.
The international air travel industry has been hit with jet fuel problems before. That includes in 2008 when costs jumped by 40% amid a global financial crisis, sending airlines' operating margins near zero. And in the 70s when the Arab oil embargo caused a severe shortage of fuel for planes. But this time is different.
This situation has both shortage and increase in price.
Ahmad Abdelghani is a professor who studies the aviation business at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Florida. He says the unfolding jet fuel crisis is unprecedented. Several major refineries in the Middle East have been damaged in the war, and the Strait of Hormuz, which is critical for global oil shipments, remains functionally closed. That's dealt a sort of 1-2 punch to the aviation industry, with both a major crunch in the available supply of fuel for planes and a huge spike in cost.
Add to it also the uncertainty and the fluid situation. Right now, the airlines are thinking about the schedule of a new season, right? And the calculations of whether a flight is profitable or not depends on what is the fuel price I'm expecting for the future. So this uncertainty doesn't help the planning for the future, which is the main challenge for the airlines.
Airlines around the world, from Air Canada to Vietnam Air, have cut flights in recent weeks to save money and save fuel. Others have introduced fuel surcharges, ramped up baggage fees, and increased ticket prices, passing along some costs to customers. But Abdelghani says carriers can only ramp up costs so much before spooking potential travelers, meaning airlines are going to take a big financial hit.
The longer the situation continues, of course, it's going to impact some airlines, especially the smaller ones, the ones that they don't have enough cash.
In Nigeria, smaller domestic airlines have said they may halt operations entirely due to the cost of jet fuel. The government there has managed to stave off a total shutdown by trying to cap fuel prices and reduce airline debts. But during a forum hosted by Semaphore last week, Nigerian billionaire and refinery owner Aliko Dangote warned that if the war doesn't end, carriers will fold.
If we continue like this, majority of African airlines won't be able to survive.
In Europe, it's not just soaring costs. The head of the International Energy Agency, Fatih Birol, says fuel supplies could disappear within weeks.
In Europe, we have maybe 6 weeks or so jet fuel left.
Birol's announcement is sending shockwaves through the global travel industry, not just because it could spell disaster for European carriers who might be forced to ship in costly reserves from other parts of the world right ahead of the busy summer travel season, but also because it's put into sharp perspective just how fragile the jet fuel supply chain is. While other oil products like gasoline have been hit by the war in Iran, prices haven't risen nearly as sharply, and continent-wide shortages haven't been a problem. So what makes jet fuel different?
Jet fuel is ultimately one of the smaller cuts of the barrel.
Amanda Hilo is a pricing expert at Argus Media, a company that specializes in analyzing commodity markets like jet fuel. She tells me that fuel for planes is just different than other types of fuel. Only a small portion of a barrel of crude oil can be used to make it.
For every barrel going into the refinery, it produces roughly 10% jet fuel. That compares to a cut of roughly 40% gasoline and 25 to 30% diesel.
As a result, Hilo says, refineries just can't make that much jet fuel.
So the less you have of a specific product, the more vulnerable it will be to supply shocks.
And the war in Iran, to put it bluntly, has been the supply shock of all supply shocks. Roughly a quarter of the global supply of jet fuel comes from the Strait of Hormuz. Losing that is bad, though not global shortage bad. After all, you still have the other 75%. But because there just isn't that much jet fuel to go around in the first place, other major producers like South Korea, Thailand, and China have banned or severely restricted their own exports to prioritize domestic supply, cutting off other countries who rely on them.
So that leaves Europe specifically, which pulls roughly 40% of their imports from the Middle East, and some summer volumes from Asia short.
There's hope that if the war ends, the supply and price of jet fuel will normalize, and airlines and travelers will get some financial relief. But Hilo says even if the Strait of Hormuz opens today, it could take nearly 2 months for shipments to reach Europe, meaning, optimistically, the jet fuel crisis won't end anytime soon. If the war drags on, analysts say the future of air travel looks grim. Smaller airlines could begin dropping like flies. Larger ones will continue cutting flights. And tickets? Those will certainly get more expensive. For The World, I'm Jeremy Siegel.
One more note on the topic of oil. We would be remiss not to mention that effective this Friday, the United Arab Emirates has announced plans to leave OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries. That is after 60 years of membership.
The move would strip OPEC of its third largest producer and further weaken its leverage over global oil prices. Experts say the withdrawal likely will not have any immediate impact on oil markets since right now oil supplies are moving at a snail's pace.
We will continue following the story as it develops.
The Mexican state of Jalisco is home to one of the country's most polluted water systems and to an unusually high number of people with kidney disease. Lake Chapala in Jalisco is the water source for 60% of nearby Guadalajara, a city of 5.5 million people, and it's wildly polluted. But there is some hope. One small town has a wastewater cleaning operation, but as WESA's Glynis Board reports from Jalisco, it's not enough.
There's a crop of brightly colored flowers thriving in the small town of Ojo de Agua, red and purple blooms on stalks 4 and 5 feet tall. Before anthropologist and water researcher Joshua Green stoops to weed out the willows trying to root among them, he points to the stream flowing into the wetland.
This is the wastewater when it comes out of the sediment tank. So it's already transparent. It's still pretty stinky, but it's a lot better than it was.
The stream is flowing out of a buried sediment tank, roughly the size of a 2-car garage, into the wetland that Green and his team have created. It's the septic system for a town of about 1,000 people. Not long ago, raw sewage flowed down an open canal into Lake Chapala.
It was a $150,000 project. 21 American Rotary Club groups helped pay for it. And it took about 9 months of construction and lots of planning and lots of community involvement. And the last step was to load up pickup trucks with plants and get the kids in the community to come out and put them in the ground.
Green has been living in Guadalajara, Mexico since 2007. He's been working with the lake, rivers, and many of the farming and indigenous communities in the region affected by contaminated waters.
So we're treating 1,000 people's wastewater, and there's 330,000 people who live along the lake. So We need 300 more systems like this for those people. But, it's a start.
The challenge is daunting. And not everyone believes bottom-up solutions like his are at all feasible.
There has to be a real shift in political will.
Cindy McCullough is a professor and researcher in Jalisco who's been studying industrial pollution in the nearby Santiago River for decades. And while she acknowledges Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, has committed to cleaning up the country's most polluted waterways, McCullough says there are precious few regulations to control wastewater discharges and very weak enforcement.
So between 2018 and 2025, the National Water Commission, for instance, has only conducted about 3,800 inspections per year. So at that rate, they would need 140 years to visit each and every one of those permits and discharges.
She explains these poorly enforced environmental regulations are part of what make the region so attractive to industries. More than 700 factories from across some 60 industrial sectors call the region home, including many multinational companies. Researchers like McCullough call these regions sacrifice zones, and she worries a lot about the communities here.
I take a lot of inspiration in the actual people who are, at the front line of the struggle, and whose bodies, of course, at that front line, but who are also putting their bodies forward.
In November last year, many of these community members rallied, pasting recent research findings on the front door of the governor's mansion. A study of 178 residents, almost a quarter of them children, found concentrated amounts of arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury in urine samples, and that every one was exposed to nickel and aluminum. Heavy exposure to these pollutants can cause respiratory, neurological, bone, and kidney damage. In March, Jalisco's governor, Pablo Lemos, announced the replacement of the director of the region's water and sanitation system in response to so many water quality complaints and what he called Guadalajara's ongoing water crisis. Meanwhile, residents like Paul Fermin Rodriguez Torres explain kidney transplants in his community are as common as kids carrying fishing poles.
Mi cuñada de 9 años, ella...
My 9-year-old sister-in-law was hospitalized for a year because of kidney disease. Thank God she recovered, he says. She's already had the transplant and is taking very good care of her kidneys. Torres says many residents believe their communities have been cursed, but many locals are also organizing, like Alejandro Luevanos. He grew up here and remembers a time when Lake Chapala was much cleaner. Luevanos has been on the ground leading wetland construction efforts. He says he got involved so that he and his kids know how to clean water.
Pues sí, da mucho gusto que pudimos colaborar con esto.
It's very gratifying that we were able to collaborate on this, he says, that we're contributing our grain of sand to this work. I want to continue getting involved and specializing more in this and keep doing our part to give people access to clean water. The low-maintenance, gravity-powered sewage system Luevanos put in place in Ojo de Agua is not novel technology, but it's practical.
Mi gran sueño sería que
My big dream for the region would be for so much disease in the area to decrease and for us to see the lake alive again, like it was before, he says. At the edge of the lake, where the wetlands waters reach Lake Chapala, Joshua Green points to some of the birds that have recently returned to the spot.
So here's the white pelicans coming down to our outlet. So I'm thinking that's a sign because they're coming down to the outlet of my wastewater system. I think they must know this is where the good water's coming from. Those are our bioindicators.
This is the fourth wetland sewage system Green and Luevanos have built so far. While the work does nothing to address the onslaught of industrial waste, they both maintain hope that taking some step is better than no step in what Green calls the ongoing ecocide in Jalisco. For The World, I'm Glynis Board, Jalisco, Mexico.
You're listening to The World.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. Young people don't want to do it. The old are retiring. But someone in Spain needs to take care of these creatures. Sheep. Shepherds are in high demand in the Spanish countryside, but resumes are hardly rolling in. There is hope, though, in a school for shepherds. The World's Jerry Haddon reports from Ciudad Real in central Spain.
In a barn on a small country farm, 61-year-old Javi Esteban separates his sheep into two corrals. One group's for milking, the other for taking out to pasture. But one stubborn ewe seems decidedly opposed to both options. She keeps skittering away. So Javi asks his much younger farmhand, 27-year-old Osan Obdemun, to catch her. It's tough work, even in this enclosed space, but Obdemun eventually catches the ewe by a back leg and leads her into a pen.
Venga, vamos.
Then he leads the entire flock outside, up a sloping green field toward today's grazing grounds, just over the ridge. Obdemun cuts quite the figure here. He's 6'5" and dressed in blue coveralls, a bit short in the sleeve. He's originally from Darfur in Sudan.
Sí, ahora mi país todo es muy problema. No Darfur solo.
Right now in my country, there are problems everywhere, he says, not just in Darfur. I left home because of the war. That was 8 years ago, he says. I was in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, and then Morocco. Obdemun left home alone, hasn't seen his parents or 10 siblings since. Last year in Morocco, he scaled a border fence in the North African Spanish enclave of Ceuta and got asylum. Then this job.
Cuando dijiste a tu padre por teléfono, papá.
When you were finally able to call your dad, I asked him, and tell him you were working as a shepherd here in Spain, what did he say?
Muy bien. Tú también tranquila ahora.
He told me, very well done, son. You can relax now. You have work. It's work Obdemun knows well. He comes from a family of shepherds, although they raise cattle and camels. Once in Spain, Obdemun caught wind of the Shepherd School of Castilla-La Mancha through an NGO. He signed up.
Si estamos diciendo que los picos de producción de hierba son...
The guy who started the school is Pedro Luna. In a recent class, he lectures to around 20 at-risk students, in this case, a couple of Spanish prisoners on work leave, and the rest, newly arrived refugees, mostly from Africa. On the final day of the course, Pedro and his students bus it to a sheep farm for some hands-on learning.
Pues desde 2024, 63 contrataciones.
I've placed 63 of my students in real jobs since the program started 2 years ago, Luna tells me. The biggest obstacle these refugees face is learning Spanish. But once they've got a handle on it, it's easy to get them work. And these jobs, he says, are stable and ongoing, not seasonal gigs like, say, in tourism. The host at today's sheep farm is Juan Carlos González. I ask him why he's willing to take a day off to welcome these students.
Creo que está muy bien. Es una cosa que se está haciendo nueva que yo la veo perfecta.
I think this project is great, he says, because at least when a new worker arrives, especially an immigrant, they know exactly what they're getting into. For instance, mechanized milking. Inside a barn, ewes who have just given birth enter long rows of milking stalls. They are disoriented and skittish, and it's fair to say so are the students. These are absolutely the hardest animals to work with, laughs Pedro Luna, watching from a balcony. They've never been milked before, he says over the din. This is their first time. Down below, each student stands before a bulging pink udder holding a pair of rubber suction cups attached by tubes to a mechanical aspirator. The trick here, a farmhand tells them, is to grab the udder firmly, then pop the cups over the nipples so they seal and hold. It takes a while, but most of them get the hang of it. Back outside, a guy from Zimbabwe, Limu Kanimoyo, is grinning and shaking his head.
You were laughing before because you said you'd never seen anybody milk a sheep.
No, yes, it's quite strange because in Zimbabwe, few people who will consume the milk from the sheep. Most of it is milk from the cows. In the rural areas, they will consume milk from the goats, but it's also very rare.
How did it feel today to try to use the mechanical milking machines?
It's something new to me, and so it's an experience. It was quite interesting.
Like Osan Obdemun, Kanimoyo comes from a shepherding family. He fled Zimbabwe, he says, after being attacked for supporting an opposition candidate for president a few years ago.
A couple of times, yes, they will ambush me in front of the house, or when I was visiting somewhere, it was becoming more difficult and a familiar situation for me, so definitely I had to leave.
On the bus ride home, the students are clearly tired, but then Pedro Luna's phone buzzes. It's a message from a farmer who urgently needs 2 shepherds.
Para ordeñar, por milking. Sí. Vale. Vale.
A guy named Sail, a refugee from the Palestinian-occupied territories, catches wind of the opportunity. He types into a translator app on his phone. I can do that job, he says. No problem.
Congratulations, you've got a job.
El lunes os llamo, que yo tengo que vivir, ¿eh?
He most certainly does, Luna tells me, because back home, Sail once had sheep too, before Israeli settlers on the West Bank drove him from his land, he says.
Venga. Vamos.
Those kinds of dangers are nowhere to be found in Spain, Osan Obdemun tells me. He's walking back to the farm from the highland pasture. Here, it is so peaceful, he says. I love animals. Although he doesn't love so much the award-winning manchego cheese made from these sheep's milk. It's a cultural thing, he says.
Yo come poco queso, no.
I don't eat cheese too often, he says. In Sudan, we drink the animal's milk directly. We have sheep and lots of camels. But I looked online and Spain doesn't have camels, except on the Canary Islands.
¿Y cómo es la leche de camello? ¿Buena?
What does camel's milk taste like, I ask him. Is it good?
Es muy bueno porque es dulce.
Yeah, really good, he says, smiling. It's sweet. It has a lot of sugar in it, more even than cow's milk. I miss my camels, he says, wistfully. But Obdemun's saving money. When he's got enough, he says, and when the war in Sudan is over, he'll go home and raise a glass or 2 of his cherished camel's milk with, of course, his family. For the World, I'm Jerry Haddon, Ciudad Real, Spain.
There was a moment of cross-border friendship in Buffalo, New York yesterday ahead of the Stanley Cup playoff game between the Buffalo Sabres and Boston Bruins.
Oh, Canada, our home and native.
Singer Camille Clooney's microphone suddenly cut out, but she got an assist from thousands of backup singers.
With glowing.
The crowd kept the song going through the technical difficulties. Hockey fans, in this case, are a bit more cooperative than governments. President Trump has placed tariffs on and lobbed insults at Canada and has repeatedly talked about annexing the country. Last year, fans booed the U.S. anthem in Montreal when the 2 countries' national hockey teams played.
Buffalo is a unique case. If you're wondering how so many Americans know the Canadian anthem, it's sung before every home game in Buffalo, regardless of who the opposing team is, as a sign of kinship with nearby Ontario.
This is The World.
This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Far-right parties have made significant gains all across Europe over the past couple of decades. We've seen it in Italy, Germany, Hungary, and the Netherlands. In France, the far-right Rassemblement National, or RN, has had a steady rise from what was once a fringe movement to now a mainstream party, the largest in the country. Its former leader, Marine Le Pen, has run for president several times, losing twice to Emmanuel Macron, but gaining ground each time. She has been barred from running again in 2027 because of legal troubles, though she has appealed her embezzlement conviction. Her protege, however, 30-year-old Jordan Bardella, does have a serious chance to win it. Victor Mallet is a senior editor with Financial Times and the author of a new book, Far-Right France, Le Pen, Bardella, and the Future of Europe. I asked Mallet why he believes that a far-right presidency in France would be a major turning point for Europe.
France, like Germany, is one of the key players in the European Union. So if France turns to the far right, it has quite dramatic implications for the whole of the European Union and everything it does. You know, it's a single market, and the euro currency is very important. And also for NATO. Obviously, France is an important member of NATO. And that's, you know, would have a pretty dramatic effect on that too, probably. Although, of course, we don't know exactly what they'll do, but we know what Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella say they're going to do.
I'd like to know more about the face of the far right in France today, because much has been said about the ties between the far right in Europe and the MAGA movement in the U.S., from its support for the former Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, to J.D. Vance supporting Germany's AfD party. How does France's national rally compare to MAGA? And are far right leaders like Jordan Bardella inspired by Trump?
Well, they long predate MAGA. They long predate Trump. The Front National, as it then was, the National Front, was set up in 1972 by Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie Le Pen. And it's just steadily over the years got bigger and bigger and stronger and stronger. And it is one of probably the leading far-right movement in Europe in terms of big countries. So it's not so much that they're inspired by Trump. In fact, you saw Trump being inspired by Viktor Orban in Hungary. He was a great admirer of Viktor Orban, who, of course, lost power in the election on April the 12th in Hungary. The far right in France is initially, I think, when Trump began his second administration, he was very supportive of Marine Le Pen. But Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella have very deliberately distanced themselves from Trump because Trump is very toxic in Europe at the moment. His administration is closer to the AfD in Germany, which is sometimes shunned by Marine Le Pen and Bardella because it's seen as a little bit too neo-Nazi.
Oh, interesting. So let's talk about some of the cudgels the far right in France has used to build its base. A big one, of course, has been the immigrant trope, but there are others. What has been the thing that got the RN started, and how has it built on that with other issues?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, immigration has been the core of the party since the beginning in terms of its motivation. It's about race, it's about immigration. And France, of course, has a very large population of Muslims from North Africa who immigrated after the war from the former French colonies in North Africa, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and so on. And now there's a large migration also from West and Central Africa, from the Francophone countries there. So this has always been the big issue for the French far right, as it is for MAGA and for Trump in America. But it's important to say that it's not the only issue. Economic issues have also come to the fore. And Marine Le Pen in particular is a very pragmatic politician. And when she thinks that people are more concerned about making ends meet at the end of the month, about their finances, she will focus very much on the economy.
So you said earlier, Victor, that the RN in France is not as extreme as, say, the AfD in Germany. On immigration, I mean, how does the far right in France distinguish its, shall we say, gentler racism?
Yeah, I think, of course, we don't know how extreme they might be once in power. But the great success that Marine Le Pen has had is in what they call in France dédiabolisation, which is detoxifying the party by making sure that all its public statements are not going to alarm voters from the centre right who might vote eventually for the party. So there is a lot of rhetoric about this. They're very keen on not being seen as Nazis. And in fact, Jordan Bardella was going to talk at CPAC near the beginning of the second Trump administration in early 2025. And he turned around after Steve Bannon did a Nazi salute and went back home and said, I can't be associated with this kind of thing. So there's very much a public message there of moderation, normalization of the party, which has been a real success in electoral terms. It's really got them a lot of support in France. Nevertheless, if they come to power, they have promised or threatened to take pretty drastic action against migrants and against people who are non-citizens living in France. And this would be, if they carry out what they say they're going to carry out, would be quite a Trumpian approach to migrants.
So Jordan Bardella, he is Marine Le Pen's protege. He's this preppy-looking guy who is popular with young people on social media. Where is he coming from, and how did he rise through the ranks? Like, what makes him different such that polls have him en route to the presidency? Because he's not your classic French technocrat politician, is he?
Absolutely not. He's incredibly young. He's still only 30 years old, and he would be 31, going on 32 if he became president. And that is, in a sense, his greatest electoral weakness, is that he has no experience. But it's also, in some ways, his greatest strength, that he's not tainted by power. He's never run anything, so he can never be accused of running things badly because he hasn't run them, except the party itself, of course. He is president of the RN party. He was brought up in a sort of slightly rough suburb of northern Paris, where he kind of resented the drug dealing that he says took place at the bottom of his building. And he resented the fact that North African migrants did not seem to be integrating into society the way his Italian forebears did. So, he was a sort of resentful, middle-class guy who felt isolated, if you like, as a white person living in that part of Paris, a very multiracial part of Paris. And then he was found very early on by Marine Le Pen, became her protege, and very rapidly ascended up the party, and has now, of course, taken on his own persona. His policies are beginning to differ slightly from hers, but he was very much her creation as a politician. And he's something of an unknown quantity, as I said, because he's never run anything except the party itself. But he is all over social media. He's very popular with women and men and gay men. They've managed to run their social media campaigns very, very effectively, more effectively, I think, than the centre and the left in France. And he's just revealed that he's going out with an Italian princess called Maria Carolina de Bourbon of the Two Sicilies, which, of course, has caused a great ruckus because, the left-wing parties, the Communist Party and so on, are saying, oh, look, you see, he doesn't care about the working class at all. He's going off with these aristocrats. But I'm not sure that it will be so bad for his electoral chances.
Yeah, clearly he's not immune from the celebrity pages of Paris Match.
No, he organized the celebrity pages of Paris Match, actually. His line was that they were being pursued by paparazzi, and it seems that they set up this photo shoot.
Interesting. We're talking far-right politics in France with writer Victor Mallet from the Financial Times, who's got a new book out titled Far Right France. So Bardella's parents are migrants. How does he reflect on that as someone who is against unlimited migration?
Well, yes, as I said, it was the first question I asked him when I first interviewed him about 7 years ago. I said, well, you've got an Italian name, so presumably you're of migrant origin as well. And he said, look, we Italians, we Europeans have integrated quickly into French society, and the others have not. Now, this is not strictly true, because actually, if you look back over history, the Italians were much resented by French workers, for example, in the south of France. So now it's true that Europeans are integrated into French society, and a lot of North Africans will, people of North African origin will tell you, we will also integrate, but it will take time. But it's true, of course, that people are Muslim and not Christian if they come from North Africa. Generally speaking, they're Muslims. Also, a lot of Jews migrated from North Africa. So it's a very tense issue in France, this business of it has the largest population of Muslims in Europe. It also has the largest population of Jews in Europe. And this is a recipe for a lot of tension in society over issues like crime and migration and social issues about the way people behave.
So the field of candidates for the 2027 presidential election in France is a little unclear right now. If Bardella wins the election, it would be the first time France has had a far-right head of state since World War II. You mentioned what might happen on day one of a Bardella presidency. What do we know for sure would change?
A lot depends on whether a new president will almost certainly call a National Assembly election as well. So the president gets the presidency, which puts him in charge essentially of defense and foreign policy. But he needs to also have the support of the parliament, the National Assembly, in order to be able to run the economy effectively. So what normally happens is a first-term president, as soon as he's elected, he'll call a National Assembly election, and that would happen. So if the far right also gets control of the National Assembly, Bardella or Le Pen or the two of them would essentially have unfettered power to put through their very radical program of cutting migration right back and transforming the relationship with Europe and possibly transforming the relationship with NATO. This would have just big effects in France, in Europe, and in the Western alliance.
I mean, Emmanuel Macron has been a strong bulwark against Russia in its war in Ukraine, especially with the U.S. under Trump, an unreliable partner. Would France under Bardella move closer to Putin?
So that's a very good question. Now, the thing about Marine Le Pen herself is quite compromised in this regard because she was very friendly towards Putin. She even endorsed the occupation and annexation of Crimea in 2014 by the Russians and by Putin. And in fact, in her last election campaign, she had to destroy a manifesto leaflet that had a picture of her with Putin in the Kremlin. So and also her previous campaigns have been financed by banks with links to Russia. So she is definitely compromised. Bardella actually has been more forthright in condemning the Russian invasion of Ukraine and expressing support for Ukraine. So that's one of the ways in which the two are potentially slightly different. But the far-right movement as a whole is generally more sympathetic to Russia and certainly less willing to accept, for example, higher energy prices, higher gas prices that come with sanctioning Russia over the war in Ukraine.
It's so weird because France used to be the poster child for westernized socialism. So today, what does the pushback to the far right in France look like? Is it organized, or does it feel like the far right is operating with its own momentum and there's nothing really standing in its way?
The traditional parties, the centre-right party, Les Républicains, the Republicans, as they call in France, and the Socialist Party, the main centre-left party, they're very, very weak at the moment. They're very divided. In fact, half of the centre-right party defected to the far right at the last legislative election in 2024. So they're not operating in a vacuum, but they are operating against other parties that have sort of lost their momentum. And this sort of disappearance or withering away of the mainstream parties was taken advantage of by Macron in 2017 when he came through from the centre and said, I'm neither left nor right, I'm in the middle. And he won in 2017 and he won again in 2022. But actually that phrase, neither left nor right, was actually a phrase used by Jean-Marie Le Pen long before Macron came on the scene. And he used that phrase to say, that the far right party was not left or right, it was nationalist. And Marine Le Pen now says we're a nationalist party as opposed to a globalist party.
Victor Mallet is a senior editor with the Financial Times and author of the just published Far Right France, Le Pen, Bardella, and the Future of Europe. Victor, thanks very much for this conversation.
Thank you.
If you drive south from the U.S. into Mexico, you will notice a lot of Chinese-made electric cars on the road. Nina Kravinsky of the Fronteras desk at KJZZ reports on what that means for the U.S. and for Mexico.
A tattooed rideshare driver smokes a cigarette as he leans against the hood of his beige pint-sized electric car.
Sí es mucho el ahorro.
The savings are big, says Juan Navarro, who used to spend about $25 a day on gas before buying his BYD Dolphin Mini. He spends a fraction of that to charge the Chinese electric car. He's one of dozens of members of a meetup group of other Dolphin Mini owners. Like Navarro, most of them also bought the cars to drive around Hermosillo for apps like Uber. Today, a few are gathered at dusk in a parking lot, including Fabián Morales. Just 2 years ago, he became one of the first owners of the fully electric hatchbacks in Hermosillo.
Y se está viendo que está creciendo muy rápido.
It's growing really quickly, Morales says. In just a few years, BYD cars have become a fixture on Mexican streets, even as they're virtually banned in the U.S. In Hermosillo, just a few hours south of the Arizona border, a sleek, modern BYD dealership sells electric pickups, SUVs, and sedans at a lower price point than most of its competitors.
Chinese automakers have been really eager to find new markets.
Ilaria Matsoko is with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She says companies like BYD have been able to keep their prices low, partially because of government subsidies, but also because they're able to produce certain components like batteries in-house. Over the past 6 years or so, Matsoko says imported Chinese cars have been a big driver of Mexico's expanding EV infrastructure. The state of Sonora last year built its first public electric charging station to much fanfare in Hermosillo. Matsoko says car manufacturers from elsewhere have been unable or unwilling to keep up.
The U.S. is certainly not offering an alternative here.
But the U.S. has taken an interest in the rise of Chinese cars in Mexico. Officials fear Chinese investment in Mexico and the rest of Latin America has gotten too big. And in the U.S., officials have banned cars with connected Chinese tech over concerns they pose a national security risk by potentially transmitting data to the Chinese government. Matsoko says those points are likely to come up in the upcoming review of the USMCA trade agreement that binds the U.S., Mexico, and Canada.
Mexico has a very important relationship with the United States, and the United States has a really conflictual relationship with Chinese electric vehicles. That puts Mexico in a really awkward position.
Mexico did put a hefty tariff on Chinese cars starting at the beginning of this year. Jorge Guajardo is the former Mexican ambassador to China and says that the new tariff does more than just appease the U.S.
None of these Chinese cars have Mexican-made auto parts. So I think we're putting a huge industry at risk by just letting them in.
Back at the Dolphin Mini meetup, tariffs don't seem to be weighing too heavily on anyone's mind. Fernando Vargas has had his small EV for just a week. Like the others, he uses it to drive for rideshare apps.
literal, el doble de ganancia.
Vargas estimates he's making twice as much as he did with his gas car. A charge costs less than a full tank of gas and lasts for a few full days of work. At that rate, and as the price of gas rises globally, he and the others seem unfazed by the possibility of replacement parts getting more expensive because of Mexico's new tariff. There's agreement, too, that China is meeting a need that the U.S. seems to be failing to. I feel like they're more advanced than the United States, says group member Navarro. So far, the group's biggest enemy hasn't been tariffs. It's been the roads themselves, says Fabián Morales.
Está muy suave y todo, ¿no? Pero no están hechos para las calles de aquí de Hermosillo.
They're really cool and all, but they're not made for the streets of Hermosillo.
Porque por los baches truenan bien rápido los neumáticos.
The potholes are destroying my tires, Morales says with a laugh. For The World, I'm Nina Kravinsky in Hermosillo, Mexico.
For refugees who are kids, change is a constant reality. When they receive asylum, there's getting used to life outside a refugee camp. Then the adjustment to life in a new country with a different culture. Maybe there's a whole new family. But for one young woman from Sudan, all that just scratches the surface. That story's coming right up.
You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. The Lost Boys of Sudan. You may remember this phrase used widely to describe the cohort of kids whose parents were killed in Sudan's civil war more than 30 years ago. Not all of them were boys, though.
There were about 3,400 boys that came, and then only 89 girls.
That's Rebecca Dang. She was one of those girls who were often excluded in the telling of that history. Rebecca wrote a memoir about her experience called What They Meant for Evil. She recently told a story included in the book to an audience for the GBH series Stories from the Stage. Rebecca began with her first impressions, arriving at an airport in Michigan after leaving the refugee camp where she'd lived.
As I walked through the luggage area, there was this bright light everywhere. And I was like, wow, this is fascinating. Because in Kakuma refugee camp, where I grew up, there was no electricity. And as I looked beyond the light, there was this sea of white people. And they all were blonde and blue eyes, it appeared. But even in Europe, where we had layover, I saw many different races. But in Grand Rapids, Michigan, there was no black person but me and 5 other refugee children I was traveling with. The media named us the Lost Boys and Girls of Sudan because we had all lost our parents in the war or they disappeared. I met my foster parent and we speak different languages. I only knew few words in English like hello, how are you, boy, girl, cup, water. I was a little bit relieved when I learned that my foster parent had worked in Kenya and can say few phrases in Swahili like jambo, habari yako, which means hello, how are you doing? The first few weeks in the United States, I was overwhelmed by everything. The language, the culture, the food, even new smell, from choices of soap at the grocery store to seafood. I never lived in a place where you don't see sun for month and month. One day, my foster mom is trying to tell me something I did not understand. She took my hand, put it in her belly, and I felt the baby moving. And I was like, oh, you are pregnant. I can tell that she's a little bit relieved because I'm near her house and she didn't know how to tell me. But in my culture, where I came from, the more siblings, the better. Eventually, she invited me to go to the doctor appointment with her. She told me that I will see the baby. And I was like, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? You you cannot see unborn baby. Is she going to labor? At the appointment, the doctor let her lay down, and she put something jelly in her belly and took something that looked like a magic wand that is connected to computer and moved it in her belly. And we heard this sound, wow, 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 and something moving. It was fascinating. I was like, wow, it's a baby. I'm going to be a sister. When the doctor was finished, she told the doctor, I'm a little bit concerned about Rebecca. I had told her that since I arrived, I had missed my period for several months, and she dismissed it. She told me that it's because of weather change and diet, you're only 15. The doctor looked at me, touched my belly, asked me to lay down just like my foster mom, and she took the same magic wand and moved it in my belly, and I heard the same sound. Wow, 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 wow. I was pregnant. I was shocked. My foster mom was shocked. Everyone in the room was shocked. In a refugee camp where I was growing up, I had a boyfriend, but we were never intimate. We didn't even kiss. We just write love letters like, I will love you to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. I will love you till the river Nile dried up. And also, as a refugee girl, I didn't attend school regularly, so I never had a sex education. I knew at 15 and 16, a man and a woman can make a baby, but I thought that when they were married, and I was not married. But few days before I left the refugee camp, I was raped. And I didn't know that you can be pregnant that way. And so I was thinking like, wow, is this it? And I was never touched by a man before, so it didn't all make sense. So my foster mom had her son in March, and I had my daughter Jolie in July. I think I was in labor for like 24 hours. It was super long and tiring at 15. But once I heard her first cry and saw her beautiful face, I fall in love with her. In my culture, when you become a parent, it is your first responsibility. So I imagine myself dropping out of high school and raising my daughter. But my foster mom and caseworker encouraged me to continue my education. They told me that you might have a child, but you are a child. So each morning, I will get up early, before I go to high school, and then come home during lunch, feed the baby quickly, and then go back. And then after school, I come back, and I play with my child while I do my homework. It was the most brilliant thing of my life. And so when I look back into my life when I first arrived in the United States, I did not know what to expect. But my daughter surely grounded me. I don't know if I would have worked so hard in the school to go on to college and graduate school. I have enjoyed watching the woman she is becoming today, and she blessed me. Thank you.
That was Rebecca Dang, author of What They Meant for Evil, How a Lost Girl of Sudan Found Healing, Peace, and Purpose in the Midst of Suffering.
The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston. Find us online anytime at theworld.org and check out more of our original reporting on YouTube. We are at The World News GBH. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Join us again right back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. by the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Renee Vacchio Albi, Roman Mars, the Kelson Foundation, and the Ken and Lucy Lehman family. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.